Namaskar. I, Kashish, on the behalf of Advaita, the Spiritual Society of Hansraj College, welcome the esteemed guest of the day, Swami Tattwamayananda, and audience in second session of From Self to Service, with special reference to the philosophical insight of Swami Vivekananda ji. मनुष्य शांति की खोज में है, लेकिन स्थूल से सूक्ष्म में जाए बिना शांति नहीं मिल सकती। उन सच्चाइयों से रूबरू होना अत्यंत आवश्यक है जो आत्म में निहित है। There is a saying that the best form of knowledge available in this world is the knowledge of self. स्वयं को जानो, स्वयं को मानो और स्वयं में लीन हो जाओ। तथा अहम ब्रह्मास्मि इस एक वाक्य में ही अध्यात्म का सार है और इस सार को जन जन तक विशेषकर विद्यार्थियों तक पहुंचाना ही अद्वैत आध्यात्मिक समिति का लक्ष्य है। हमारी समिति इस क्षेत्र में पूरे मनोयोग से कार्य कर रही है और आशा है कि आगे भी हम इसी उत्साह के साथ कार्य करते रहेंगे। तो आइए आज के कार्यक्रम की शुरुआत हम संगठन मंत्र के साथ करते हैं। फॉर दिस आई वुड लाइक टू कॉल सुभाष जी।
ॐ सहनाववतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ॐ
We will have emphasis on the concept of self and service. What is the concept of service? As Swami Vivekananda ji said, this is the gist of all worship, to be pure and to do good to the others. If you want to find God, serve men. To reach Narayana, you must serve the Daridra Narayans, the starving millions. Self and service are mutually inclusive. They are the two sides of the same coin, where awareness helps us to see non-duality of the qualified whole. Seva Paramo Dharma. And today, we will try to understand this philosophy in depth under the guidance of Swamiji. But before that, let me introduce you all the honored guest of the event, Swami Tattwamayananda, who is currently the minister of the Vedanta Society of Northern California, San Francisco. He underwent traditional training in Hindu scriptures, Sanskrit, Vedic, and Vedantic literature for many years from his early days. He also served in various centers of the Ramakrishna Order in India as editor, publisher, and teacher of Sanskrit and Advaitic texts. Before coming to the US in January 2012, he was teaching Sanskrit and Vedantic scriptures and Indian philosophy also at the training center in Belur Math. Apart from his traditional education, Swamiji also has received modern university education in English, literature, psychology, and European history. Therefore, I request the president of the society, Yuvraj, to welcome our esteemed guest of honor, Swamiji.
Thank you, Kashish. Advaita Society of Delhi University welcomes everyone to the second session of our series, Journey from Self to Service. Advaita is an effort to awaken the subconscious mind, revive the spiritual knowledge, and promote seva, meditation, and communion among students of different colleges. We believe that without knowing oneself, one cannot devote himself or herself to selfless service. And for knowing the self, we have commenced the series of lectures. Today, we will be graced by Swami Tattwamayananda ji, Minister of Vedanta Society of Northern California, who will be joining us from San Francisco. We welcome Swamiji and thank him for sparing his time. We thank each and every one of you for coming. Kashish, we may continue now.
Thank you, Yuvraj. Before starting, I would like to put out the thing for the audience. If you have any queries for Swamiji, please drop them in the chat box and we'll be taking up your queries at the end. And please try to keep them short for our convenience. अब मैं स्वामी जी से निवेदन करूंगी कि वो आए और हमारा मार्गदर्शन करें.
Thank you. Shall I begin? Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much for those kind words of introduction. And it is indeed an honor for me to be part of this wonderful program that your education institution is conducting. And it is precisely the kind of activities which are needed in India today to bring Swami Vivekananda's message closer to the student community. And I consider it's a rare honor to be invited for this program. And thank you, everyone. Now, the subject, as announced, is from self to service. You know, one of the developments that took place in the field of religion and philosophy during the last 100 years is a radical paradigm shift from traditional philosophical, theological interpretations of religion to more and more humanistic interpretations of religion. Religion has a role to play in the affairs of the common man in the streets. It is not something that we discuss at academic circles among the Sanskrit educated elites, but it is something that should express itself as humanism in the daily affairs of the common people. And Vivekananda's great contribution was in this field of giving a humanistic interpretation to religion. He interpreted religion as a kind of spiritual humanism. Spiritual humanism here means universal spiritual humanism. Because when you interpret religion as just humanism, it can be seen as some kind of a modern egalitarian philosophy in a very narrow, limited sense. But going beyond all that, Swamiji interpreted religion as the manifestation of divinity already in man, in all of us. And as this divine reality within us manifests, it also expresses in the form of deep compassion, readiness to help others, to serve others, and bring consolation and peace to our fellow human beings. So, in other words, religion in its highest sense means spirituality. And spirituality is spiritual humanism, universal spiritual humanism. As we evolve further and further, our idea of God also evolves. A primitive person, a primitive man may think of a God as somebody living in a place of worship, in a temple. That is certainly a very wonderful idea. But going beyond that, you should be able to see God even outside the walls of the temple. We should be able to experience the presence of the Lord, presence of God, even in the creation outside among the fellow human beings. That's why during our ancient Vedic times, there was a concept of Rajarshi. Rajarshi, according to Shankaracharya, is Rajanascha Rishayascha Rajarshi. A person who is a king in terms of dynamism, enthusiasm, efficiency, and energy. At the same time, he is a sage. He is a saint in terms of his contemplative attitude. So how is this possible? When we grow in spiritual life, when we move closer to our spiritual ideal, we also become better human beings. We become more compassionate. We become aware, spiritually very sensitive to the needs of people living around us. And when this happens, religion actually enters our everyday life. Religion is not something that we practice for 2 hours in the morning, or maybe 2 hours in the evening, or maybe just on some important auspicious day of the week or month. That is perfectly okay. But religion in its purest sense is religion that we practice now everyday life. Even when we are working in a factory, when students are studying in colleges and universities, teachers are teaching, when they are taking care of their secular activities, there also religion has a role to play. In other words, even secular activities can be spiritualized, can be done with a spiritual content. When this happens, as we move closer and closer to our own spiritual goal, we become better and better human beings. We become more sensitive in our awareness of the needs of people living around us. That's why Swamiji coined this expression, Atmano Mokshartham Jagat. As we work hard for our own spiritual liberation, spiritual emancipation, we also become more and more humane. We also will work for others. In the Bhagavad Gita, if you look at it, something very interesting. Lord Krishna doesn't begin his instructions to Arjuna with karma yoga at the very beginning. When Arjuna became physically and mentally and spiritually weak, the first instruction that Lord Krishna gives to Arjuna is, you practice sakama karma. So you find in the second chapter, the very beginning, Lord Krishna tells him, if you become inactive, if you become totally lazy, if you withdraw from the field of action, then people will make fun of you. Bhaya, Radat, Ubaranadam, Mamsinte Tva Makarada, Yeshanchatum Bahumado Bhutva Yasasilakavam. You will become small in the eyes of others. Therefore, you should first of all give up inertia, laziness, inaction, and become active. Sakama karma means action with a definite motive. Then Lord Krishna says, the sakama karma is not enough. Action with a motive is not enough, because there are many people in the world who are very successful, very active, very efficient, very dynamic, but they cannot get 4 hours of sleep without taking sleeping pills. They may have a big job, may have a lot of money and wealth, may have succeeded in their professional life, but they may be living miserable life internally. So for that, we need a strong mind, a healthy mind, a spiritually healthy mind. And this is possible only by practicing, bringing yoga into karma, means karma yoga. Means you should do things according to your own ability as Swadharma. At the same time, you should be detached, you should be non-attached. It's karma yoga. So yogastha kuru karmani sangam tiktva dhananjaya siddhya siddhyo samo bhutva samatvam yoga uchyate. So one should become detached or non-attached, do our best with the best of our efficiency, at the same time remain non-attached. Then Lord Krishna talks about karma nishtha sotha. Sotharma means do our best with the efficiency, enthusiasm, and the dedication of a normal person, of ambition. At the same time, work with no ambition, with a sense of non-attachment. Saktaha karmanya vidvamso yatha kurvanti bharata kurya vidwan tatha asaktaha jigishuhu lokasangra. You do your work with all enthusiasm, with all efficiency, with all success. At the same time, remain detached or non-attached. So you find Lord Krishna is talking about, in the 4th chapter, he's talking about some great men in the past. But Swami Vivekananda used to remind about this concept again and again in his lectures. He used to talk about them. In ancient times, there were great philosopher kings called Rajashekha. used to combine in their life the efficiency, the enthusiasm, and the management skills of a modern executive. At the same time, the composed, contemplative attitude of a great sage or saint. Imam vivarsude yogam praktavanakamavayam vibhaktvan manave praha manuiksha kave abravit evam parambara praptam imam rajasyo viduhu sakalena iha mahata yogo nashta parandava. Lord Krishna talks about the ancient lineage of philosopher kings in India who combined in their life great efficiency, but also the ability to remain detached, great contemplativeness. Now, this is the essence of Rajarshi, the ability to work hard, to work for the good of others, to be efficient in running your secular everyday affairs. At the same time, you should also have the mind of a saint, a sage. So that's why one of our Sanskrit commentators who wrote commentaries on the Gita, more or less following the footsteps of Shankaracharya, he says, Rajatvam Aishwarya Sambhati Rishitvam Tasyaha Sukshmartha Darsana Kshamatvam. What it means is, you see, in this Rajarshi concept, which is the essence of Swami Vivekananda's interpretation of religion as universal spiritual humanism. In this Rajarshi concept, the Raja word implies success, efficiency, fortitude, great dynamism, management skills, leadership skills, all these great qualities which are necessary and characteristic of ancient ruling monarchs. At the same time, the ability to see the limitation of these, let us say, secular characteristics, the efficiency to achieve success and wealth. At the same time, along with that, the ability to see the limitation of that success. That is tasyaha sukshmartha darsana kshamatva. So the ability to understand the limitation of material success. At the same time, along with that, you achieve material success. This is what is required for modern India, according to Swami Vivekananda. If you can combine the best of the traditional with the best of the modern, if we can combine the best of, let us say, modern, Western characteristics, it is not necessarily Western in modern times. For example, management skills, leadership skills, organizational genius, the ability to come together and act for the good of the country and society, to preserve and culture and tradition. At the same time, along with that, to achieve great progress in social reconstruction, national reconstruction, in spreading education and prosperity all over this country. So this combination of the best of the traditional with the best of the modern, this was actually a dream of Swami Vivekananda in reality. So what it means is, it helps you to practice your ancient spiritual culture. At the same time, it also makes you aware of your responsibility to express your spirituality in the language of compassion, national awareness, willingness to serve others, to better citizens of the country and better human beings. Now, this was actually the essence of Swami Vivekananda's interpretation of religion in modern times. Now, how is it possible, let us say, in our own times? It is important for us to achieve great economic prosperity, great scientific and technological prosperity, to achieve great success in all areas. That's very, very important. But at the same time, modern Western culture, I mean, what is happening in Western world today, I mean, be happening also in many of the bigger cities of India, because they more or less the world has become one today. You cannot just draw lines of demarcation between boundaries, national boundaries or cultural boundaries. Today, the world has become one. So what is happening in places where Western culture or so-called modern culture has become very, very prominent, I mean, very, very popular. What is happening is there's a tendency to look down upon our own tradition. Of course, if you come to the place where I'm talking to you, this is San Francisco, and it is actually 4:30 in the morning today. It's late evening for you, but it's 4:30 morning today. If you come to San Francisco, if you come to Bay Area, you find a very interesting phenomenon taking place. You find many youngsters have migrated from India. They are highly well educated, highly educated, and very ambitious, and they work hard to get through IITs and engineering college universities in India, and they have come here. Now you find maybe they may not be aware of it. Vivekananda's arrow is hitting home today. And it is his dream is actually getting fulfilled. You find many of these youngsters, after coming over here, after some time, after the initial excitement is over, they suddenly become aware of a vacuum in their hearts because they have got good jobs, they have become economically, they have become secure. Now they are looking for something much more, and they feel a kind of cultural nostalgia. They look back to India, they feel the need to connect with their own ancient cultural roots. So you can find this is happening, and you find many of them turning to Vedanta, many of them turning to Vivekananda's works, drawing inspiration from Swami Vivekananda's works. So you can find this happening. Vivekananda once made a statement which shows that he must have foreseen this happening more than 100 years ago. He made this statement. Most probably during his travels in India, that is before he before the turning of the 19th century, Swamiji, in 1897, Swamiji returned to India. He first went to Sri Lanka, and then he entered Indian subcontinent, and then this Colombo Almora lectures. In that lecture, Swamiji says, what we need today is a harmonious combination of the best of modern and the best of the traditional. Then Swamiji talks about the need for us to combine in our personality, in our approach to life, these apparently contrasting characteristics: efficiency, enthusiasm, unity in action, and leadership skills, and along with that, a deep respect for our own tradition. Because during Swamiji's time, he found that youngsters with modern education, they become disinterested, and they started looking down upon their own traditional values. But today what is happening is, having received the best of modern education available in India, when they come to Western countries, after the initial enthusiasm is over, suddenly they become aware of the need to connect with their own ancient cultural roots, and you find Vivekananda's words become a source of inspiration to all these people. So what in other words, what it means is, on the one hand, Swami Vivekananda gave a new interpretation to religion. He said religion is universal spiritual humanism. And another very important aspect about this is, when we become spiritually aware of our own true nature, we look upon people around us as one spiritual family. This idea Swamiji emphasized, but you can also find this idea in some of our earlier traditional Vedantic works. There is a well-known book called Gaudapada Karika, belongs to 6th century. A.D. and Shankaracharya wrote a commentary on this. Susiddhanta vyavasthasu dvaitino nischidadudam parasparam viruddhyante taihi ayam na viruddhyate. Here, Gaudapadacharya, who was a predecessor of Shankaracharya in Advaitic lineage, he is talking about the uniqueness of Advaitic vision, Advaitic approach to human interaction. He says, those who believe in dualistic or pluralistic, here pluralism has a different meaning here. Those who believe that their idea of God, their idea of spirituality is the only correct idea, and what others believe is wrong. People like that, they are very strong in their affirmation of their own chosen ideas. But Advaita has no quarrel with anyone, because Advaita accepts the reality of the same Atman present in all of us. Now, this Advaitic vision helps us to look upon the whole humanity as one spiritual family. This is a uniqueness of Advaitic vision of life as a whole. When you believe in this idea that the same Atman resides in all fellow human beings, then all the boundaries and barriers of cultural, racial, linguistic, all these lines of demarcation vanish, and we are able to look upon the whole humanity as one spiritual family. In fact, it is the uniqueness of Hinduism. It is the unique feature of Advaitic tradition that it teaches you to look upon the whole humanity as one spiritual family. No matter what religion you belong to, no matter what country you are from or what nationality you are affiliated to, whatever it may be, the whole humanity is one spiritual family. This is the essence of Swamiji's concept of service. Because when we serve others without a spiritual ideal, the problem is at some point we may find that those whom we serve may not reciprocate. They may not show any gratitude towards us. So that can make us disappointed if we don't have a spiritual ideal to hold fast to. On the other hand, if you look upon serving others as a kind of spiritual sadhana, spiritual practice, then the service becomes a goal and means in itself. It is the beginning and the end of your activity. You don't look beyond you're doing service to others. In this respect, you find there is a gradual evolution taking place when we practice this idea. At the beginning of our spiritual life, we may look upon work and worship as two different ideas. We work in factories, work in universities, we work in different places, different offices. We have different responsibilities at the professional level. We consider these activities as secular activities. And then maybe in the morning we may pray or meditate, evening and morning we may pray and meditate, we may go to the temple in the morning or maybe in the evening. And this we consider to be spiritual activities. So we draw a line of demarcation between the secular and spiritual. Spiritual activities mean going to temples, going to, of course, people depending upon their religious roots, they will go to churches, Buddhists go to Buddhist places like that. So that they consider to be spiritual. On the other hand, teaching in a university, working in a hospital, or studying in a university, all these will be considered to be secular or non-spiritual. But as we move further and further, you find we should be able to consider work itself as a kind of worship. In other words, the temple extends beyond the walls of the temple. The presence of God becomes a reality even outside the limits of the place of worship. So spirituality or the reality of God enters our everyday secular activities. So you can practice spirituality when you are doing service, when you go to villages, when you help people in the villages. If you are a doctor going to rural areas, doing medical service to people. If you are a teacher, maybe giving free tuitions to people around. In all these activities, actually, you find there's no difference between these activities and praying in the temple. So the worship room becomes an everyday experience, a part of your life, whether you are in the workplace, meditation becomes a part of your life when you are actually studying in a university, teaching in a university, maybe working in a factory, whatever maybe we are doing, it becomes a spiritual activity. So slowly you find there is a bridge, a connection made between the secular and spiritual. Every act becomes a form of worship. And at the third stage, work and worship distinction disappears. Whole life becomes a kind of worship. You can find today this is happening. Of course, I don't remember many names. There are many great men great men and women, and many of them are youngsters, maybe of your own generation, who are drawn by, who are inspired by Vivekananda's works, and who have taken to this social work as a kind of spiritual activity. In other words, it was actually a very revolutionary concept that Vivekananda gave to us. That is, secular activity also can be done as a spiritual activity. Of course, these teachings have their roots in our ancient scriptures. As I mentioned earlier, the great kings, philosopher kings of ancient times, they were great as kings. They were also great as sages. Ashwapati, Janaka. There are many, many names in our Vedic Upanishad literature who are role models of these philosopher kings. That's because they could consider even their secular activities as a kind of spiritual sadhana. So on the one hand, it helps us to reach our spiritual goal. On the other hand, it becomes a blessing to others. So spirituality beyond the temple, beyond the place of worship, spirituality that becomes universal, spirituality that expresses itself as spiritual humanism. Now, this was a unique teaching that came from Swami Vivekananda. And this helps us, on the one hand, as I mentioned, to obtain, to understand our own spiritual nature. It helps us to reach our own spiritual liberation, Atmana Mokshartham. At the same time, it also expresses itself as a deep concern for the welfare, for the goodness of others. In other words, the secular merges with the spiritual. Whole life becomes spiritualized. In some of the ancient works of Shankaracharya and the Sanchara Padhayogu, Pradakshina Vidhi, every movement with the feet becomes a kind of circumambulation. Every word becomes a sacred mantra. Every thought becomes a kind of meditation. In other words, everything becomes an expression of the divine within. In fact, this idea which Swami Vivekananda made well known to modern people, modern man in modern times, you can find this idea is expressed even the ancient devotional classic like Bhagavata Purana. In the Bhagavata Purana, surprisingly, there's an interesting dialogue. The dialogue is between a king, a philosopher king that I mentioned just now, and a group of sages who visited him in his palace. It is called Nimi Navayogi Samvada. It's called a dialogue between 9 sages and a philosopher king. So in the Bhagavata Purana, in the 11th skandha, 11th section, you find this Kavir Antariksha Prabuddha Pipalayana Avihotrota Dumilas Chamasa Karabhajana. 9 sages, Kavir Hari Antariksha Prabuddha Pipalayana, and so on. You can read in that. Now, one question that the king puts to these 9 sages is this. He puts one question each to each of the 9 sages. But one interesting question: who is a truly spiritual person? Who is a devotee of God? Normally, when somebody asks you, or ask anybody for the matter, who is a truly spiritual person, our natural impulse tendency is to answer somebody who is very punctual in his prayers, somebody who is always very humble and who reads the scriptures. This is a natural interpretation that could happen frequently when somebody asks you, who is a truly spiritual person? But the answer that comes from this great sage Hari is something interesting. Answer is Sarva Bhudeshu Yapashid Bhagavat Bhavamatmanaha Bhudani Bhagavadi Atmani Yesha Bhagavadottama. The Sanskrit sounds may be strange to some of you, but I shall explain in detail. What it means is, the answer is not that somebody going to a place of worship or does puja every day is the real spiritual person. No, totally different. He says, a person who sees the whole humanity in God, at the same time seeing the presence of God in all fellow human beings. That person is Bhagavadottama, means is the highest devotee. This is the definition of a spiritual person in the ancient devotional classic of Bhagavata Purana. The one who sees the presence of the divine in everyone and the presence of everyone in the divine. Divine means the God. The one who sees everyone in God, the one who sees God in everyone. And also in the subsequent verses it says, the one who considers serving others as the highest form of worship. He is the true devotee. In Vivekananda's works, you find Swamiji says the human mind is the Taj Mahal of temples. A human mind, a pure mind of a humble person is the most beautiful temple of God. So whatever we do to others is not just a service, it becomes an act of worship. Now, when we serve as an act of worship, that service itself becomes a sacred activity. And when we do as a sacred activity, it fills our heart. Every bit of humble service takes us one step forward towards our own spiritual emancipation, our own spiritual goal. At the same time, it becomes a blessing to others. So, in other words, as we move closer to God, we become better and better human beings. We become more and more compassionate. We become more and more aware of the need to bring God into everything that we do. And the highest form of worshiping God is the service we do to our own fellow human beings. If we love God, if we pray to God, then we cannot hate our fellow human beings. We cannot love our God and hate all others. It cannot happen. So when we move closer to God, that closeness should express itself as compassion and service-mindedness to others. As we evolve beyond rituals, beyond philosophical, theological debates, and beyond mechanical practices of external of religion, when we actually reach the level of experience, then religion becomes spirituality. And spirituality goes beyond the conventional definitions of religion. When we become truly spiritual, then what is happening is our whole life becomes spiritualized, and everything that we do is an act of worship, and everything that we do for others is as sacred as praying to God in the temples. So this is a unique interpretation from Swami Vivekananda. I'm very happy that I got this chance to meet all of you. Thank you so much. I'll be happy to respond to questions that you may raise, and thank you. Namaskar.
थैंक यू वेरी मच स्वामी जी। अब मैं ऑडियंस से बोलना चाहूंगी, अगर उन्हें कोई क्वेरी है तो वो चैट बॉक्स में लिख सकते हैं। स्वामी जी,
Please, most welcome.
Swami ji, Anirudh ji has asked that how can we integrate the spirit of service while studying or satisfying our quest for knowledge as students? In other words, how do we orient our academic life towards service?
Yeah, as students, you have to work in a university, in a college. You have to go for secular knowledge. But when you consider this effort involved in acquiring secular knowledge, you're trying to get a degree, and that also has got a higher goal. You may want to help your parents. You may want to maybe improve your economic conditions. That is also actually a spiritual activity. For a student, study itself becomes a spiritual activity. For a teacher, teaching becomes a spiritual activity. It's called swadharma. That is one aspect about it. Any person, a teacher who's teaching actually is performing his swadharma, means his own activity. What he is doing is not only for his good, but also for the good of others. But he has to look after himself. So if you are students, if you are doing well in examinations, that actually becomes a source of help to your parents, to society, and to yourself, of course. So then it becomes a sacred activity. It becomes a sanctified activity. Of course, an element of unselfishness is what actually turns it into spiritual activity. But a student has to do his or her best to score the highest marks in examinations. That becomes swadharma. Whatever work, whatever job we have to do by virtue of our position in society, our own qualification, and also the needs of the compulsions of circumstances, that becomes swadharma. And performing one's own swadharma, one's own duty, is itself a spiritual activity. That's an important thing to remember. A farmer doing in the field, a teacher teaching, an engineer working in his factory. All these are different forms of performing swadharma. And swadharma is the most important and the most fundamental expression of spirituality. Spirituality doesn't necessarily mean meditation alone. Action is spirituality, because it is the motive behind the action that makes it a spiritual activity. It's an important thing to remember. A soldier guarding the borders of the country, the nation, is a spiritual activity, actually. That's what Lord Krishna taught Arjuna, really speaking. So also, any kind of activity, it becomes spiritual activity. When it becomes swadharma, one's own appointed duty and responsibility. Yeah.
Swami ji, Piyush Raj has asked that why it's when someone who is suffering from a disease or is ill and their relatives are praying for that person and the person dies, then the belief in God of people increases more, and why?
You mean when the person dies, the belief in God increases? You mean, eh? That's what your question is very clear. Can you elaborate once more? Repeat the question, please.
Why it's when someone who is suffering from a disease or is ill and their relatives are praying for that person and the person dies, then the belief in God of people increases more, and why?
Yeah, it could happen. Sometimes, when a painful, a tragic event happens, we suddenly become aware of the presence of something beyond our powers. We suddenly become aware of the limitation of our own efforts. So the relatives have prayed. I mean, you do your best to save the person, still he dies. So suddenly you become aware of your own limitations. And beyond limit, you cannot really do anything to save the man's life. So that can deepen our faith in some transcendental higher powers. This happens naturally. Some people become extremely sensitive. See, Ramana Maharshi's father died. Really heard Ramana Maharshi's life. Ramana Maharshi is a saint in South India. His father died, and suddenly he became aware of the reality of death. And then very soon he left his home, and the rest of his lifetime he spent in spiritual activities, became a saint. So sometimes this can give us the ability to look at the whole thing from a higher perspective. Death is an inescapable part of human existence. We can postpone it, but we cannot completely avoid it. So that inevitability, I mean, the awareness that there's a limit to your powers, that perhaps may prompt us to turn to some transcendental power that can help us to look at the whole thing from a higher and more philosophical perspective.
Swamiji, Soham Dalal has asked that what are practical ways of Vedanta and how is meditation in Vedanta?
Yeah. The first lesson in Vedanta is, as I mean, this actually I already mentioned this, Swadharma, doing one's own duty, whatever it may be, to our best of our ability, with all dedication, with our best of ability. This is the practical application. This is kindergarten, the beginning of journey in Vedantic life. As for meditation, there are two types of meditation. You can practice meditation as taught in modern institutions. But another kind of meditation is you should approach a teacher with some instructions. So, of course, for students to begin with, the best way to begin is to, most of you may have some family deities. You may have believed in Krishna, Rama, Hanuman's, different deities you may have. And you read books related to your own spiritual tradition, your own religious tradition, and spend every day, at least the morning and the evening, let's say half an hour in meditation. To begin with, one should try to meditate in the morning as soon as early as possible after getting up. That's the best thing to do. Morning is the best time for meditation, and you should focus your mind on some sacred symbol. Many of you must have studied devotional hymns, maybe from Ramcharitamanas to Tulsidaji's Ramcharitamanas or Mirabai's or other sacred literature prevalent in those places. If you can choose something that appeals to you and repeat the morning, let's say for 5 minutes, and then meditate for 50 minutes every day, that will help you. Because in the midst of all other duties, studying, getting ready for examinations, and working hard to meet the deadline in your academic pursuits, if you spend every day at least half an hour in the morning, you feel a lot of mental relief, because it is very important for you to give mind some rest. So every day, if a person can spend half an hour at least in the morning to some chanting, and then praying, and then contemplating, it will help you to keep your mind dynamic and active. Otherwise, a lot of stress and anxieties, all these problems are common, especially during these post-COVID days, even during COVID time also. So pray and meditate. These are two important things that you can practice every day, at least for half an hour. That will help you to keep your mind in a state of equilibrium. Otherwise, too much of hard work, too much of anxiety, too much of worry can break our mind, can strain our mind. So it is important for you to practice meditation at least for half an hour every day in the morning.
Swamiji.
So psychological health. Yeah. Please continue. Please continue.
Anmol has asked that what's your advice to the youth?
To youth, as I mentioned, I said again, to combine the best of the traditional and best of the modern. In our pursuit of modern education, in our efforts to get degrees, mostly focusing on Western modern education, it's important for us, no doubt. It's very, very important. But we should not forget our own cultural roots. This is a very important thing. I can see many examples, even here where I'm in San Francisco. Vedanta Society of San Francisco was founded by Swami Vivekananda in 1900. We have a large number of Indian diaspora, of course, people from different countries, from different European countries, American, Spanish, Chinese, and so on. They all come here. But one thing that you have to remember is, at the beginning of their arrival here, sometimes people feel, they become excited about the glamour of Western American culture and so on. Slowly, they start feeling a kind of inner spiritual emptiness. And then they start trying to connect with some temples or Vedanta societies and so on. So what is important is, in our pursuit of modern education, to get a good job, which is very important, we should also remember our cultural roots. You cannot spend your long hours studying scriptures or Hindu scriptures. You can't do that because all of your students are aspiring to get good job. That is really wonderful. That is absolutely essential and necessary, no doubt about it. But later on, you will realize that along with that, something else is needed to make your life complete. This is an important thing to remember. So try to combine the best of the modern, the best of Western. Of course, in modern time, 1 minute, excuse me. Modern necessarily doesn't mean Western. Modern means mostly things related to technology, science, job training, and so on. So all these activities are important, no doubt. But along with that, some understanding of our own culture, our own tradition. I tell you, highly educated, cultured Americans, I found this happening, respect you only when you know something about your own culture. That's an important thing. We see India is a unique country with an ancient civilization that is admired and respected by people all over the world. During the last 3 centuries, from 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, large number of Western intellectuals, the cream of Western intellectual culture, have developed an admiration for everything Indian. Yoga is maybe the most popular manifestation of it, but yoga is only just one of the many. So, in our pursuit of Western education, we should not neglect. We should neglect the importance of our own culture, our own traditional values. See, for example, look at India. Even now, fortunately, even now, respect for parents on the part of children and a caring attitude towards children on the part of parents the sense of sanctity and sacredness of family relationship, sanctity and sacredness of the institute of marriage. Many of these things are still preserved in India. It is, of course, facing problems in many places. I'm aware of this, but still, more or less, these values are preserved in India. No doubt about it. Now, this is a unique feature of Indian culture. This, the sanctity of family relations, sacredness of human relations. Now, these values should be preserved. At the same time, when it comes to technology, when it comes to organization, when it comes to running a company, you should try to imbibe the efficiency, the punctuality, the professionalism, the leadership skills of a Japanese or German or Western countries. In these respects, they have achieved greater success even much earlier in applying technology in their everyday life, in developing leadership skills, professionalism, pragmatism. Again, dignity of labor. You find in America, you find a big CEO, he's not worried, he may lose his job. Next day, he may go to some Trader Joe's somewhere and take up a job, $15, $10 per hour, he work. You can find many big professionals, after losing their job, they may work in restaurants washing dishes. They don't mind. People you can find here, people working as barbers, gardeners, dishwashers in restaurants when they lose their job. Along with their medical studies, they do this job also. And they're very proud of it. That kind of dignity of labor. That is, of course, now improving in India, but traditionally, we did not have much of this dignity of labor. So, any work you do, a sense of pride, with a sense of identification, be proud of it. So, the ability to combine some of these values of Western culture, professionalism, and more important, dignity of labor. This is something very interesting here. You can find people here. They proudly tell you, oh, I was studying for medicine and then I was also I was working in a barber shop. You know, you won't find many Indians among them, Americans, in Europe also this is very common. So, this kind of dignity labor, if you go to Oxford and Cambridge, you find nearby restaurants, students are doing all this work because they try to get some extra money doing work like this. So that is a unique feature. I think one of the reasons why Western countries have progressed so fast is the dignity of labor. I think that's one area where Indians, all of us, including me, have to imbibe, to learn from them. The respect for every kind of work, no matter what work you are doing. If it is legitimate, sensible work, you can be proud of it. So, okay. I think combining the best of the modern Western values with some of our own traditional values. And talking about our own traditional values, I would say respect for our heritage, plus, as I mentioned, this sanctity of family relationships. That is something unique. That is a treasure of Indian culture. And you find that to some extent in China, Japan also. Okay, thank you.
Swamiji, Jayaji has asked that how can one be consistent throughout the path of spirituality?
How can get assistance? Excuse me, could you repeat once more, please?
How can one be consistent throughout the path of spirituality?
Yeah. As I mentioned, consistency can be achieved by focusing on this idea of karma yoga or swadharma. Whatever work we are doing, do with the best of our efficiency, dedication. At the same time, you should be ready for failure also. That's an important thing. Actually, when we practice swadharma or when we practice whatever we do as a dharma, as a karma yoga, then what happens, on the one hand, we are able to achieve success, because when we are actually involved in work, we are fully focused on it. We are not anxious, we are not worried about the result, because we are able to practice a kind of detachment or non-attachment. So we are not worried about it. So when we are not worried, our focus will not be distracted. Our attention will be more focused on the work we are doing. We'll be able to apply greater concentration on the work we are doing. So our work will be better. Results also will be better. And if there is, and it frequently happens, if there is some failure from, maybe we may not be able to achieve the expected level of success, then we will not be shocked, we will not be disappointed, we will not be devastated. We will be able to contain that, maybe that setback. So this is one advantage of practicing whatever we do as Sotharma. So this concept of Sotharma will help us to be consistent in work. It's an important thing to remember. And again, in spiritual life, it doesn't move in a straight line progression. There will be different levels. After some time, you don't feel you are making progress, but you are actually making progress. So when you don't feel it, you may feel disappointed. So that we should be aware of this problem. When we are aware of this problem, then you won't be affected by that. So this is an important thing to remember. We feel that spirituality is always a ascending movement. Not necessarily. After making some progress, we may not feel the momentum. So at that time, sometimes people feel disappointed. That's wrong. So it moves in waves. After some time, there's a plateau, you get settled, again you may move forward. So when we don't feel the momentum, it doesn't mean that we have failed. So when we are aware of this problem, then this problem will not affect us much. This happens.
Swamiji, Arjuji has asked that how not to react to negative emotions and how to stay stable.
When you react to negative emotions, you are actually wasting your energy. That's an important. You are draining your energy, really. Reaction is needed, but when we react, it should not become overreaction. It should not go beyond the necessary limits. This is an important thing. When we react too much, we should remember we are actually draining our energies. We are losing our energy. We are the losers then. So when we are aware of these, then you are able to restrain yourself in your reaction to negative situations. Overreacting doesn't solve the problems. Rather, it reduces our ability to solve the problems, because so much of energy is lost when you overreact. So when we are aware of this, then we won't overreact. Reaction is necessary, reaction to situations. Overreaction is unnecessary. It's a waste of energy.
Sohamji has asked that what you think whether science is transforming the lives or increasing the turbulence in some areas.
In fact, science has been a blessing and also a curse in modern times. It has been a blessing. It has helped us in so many different ways. It has made the world come together. Nations have come closer. Transportation and many other areas, education, the increase in the production of food grains. In all these areas, science has been a great blessing. But science also has create lots of problems. In Delhi, for example, the air pollution that you are suffering from now, it's one of the examples of not making use of science properly. We cannot blame anyone, but this is an example. This happened many other places also. Air pollution, water pollution, and also now climate change, which is causing floods and many other problems all over the world. It's an example of the problems of applying science in an improper manner or applying too much of it. So we should have the wisdom to make use of the blessings of science, the powers of science. Science gives you a lot of power, a lot of comforts, a lot of your ability to control the forces of nature. That's a gift of science. But very often we use this gift, we misuse this gift to destroy the world. So that's an example of using science and technology too much or using it for wrong purposes. So the only solution is to develop a sense of value as part of education system for modern generation, how not to use science for the wrong purpose, and how to properly use the powers, the gifts of science for the good of humanity and for our own good. That comes from education. So that's the only solution. Yeah.
Swamiji, Muskanji has asked that in today's world, when someone follows a path of spirituality, it's not often openly accepted by the peers of that person. Under such circumstances, what one should do?
Yeah, that's true. Spirituality is not properly understood. That's the main reason. When you understand spirituality in its proper sense, there will not be, I believe there will be much less opposition and there will be more appreciation for it. So spirituality doesn't mean just external practices. That's an important thing to remember. External practices do constitute, they do have a place in the practice of spirituality, but that's not the whole of it. So suppose you are students, when you do your best to study and to score marks and to become ideal students, try to get a good job to help yourself, your friends, or maybe your relations, your parents. That is actually spiritual activity according to tradition. Remember, if you read the Bhagavad Gita, what did Lord Krishna teach Arjuna? To do his duty, really speaking. In fact, Mahatma Gandhi, for example. Mahatma Gandhi was reading, he looked upon Gita as his mother. He himself said, he used to turn to the pages of Gita as loving mother. But Gandhi, he was not a traditional temple goer. But also Vivekananda. Swami Vivekananda is another example. There are innumerable, many of our great freedom fighters, Gopalakrishna Gokhale, Lokmanya Tilak, Mahatma Gandhi, many others. They were great examples of practicing true spirituality. Something very interesting. It doesn't mean that they were doing puja all the time or they were performing some rituals all the time. No. They were practicing many of these ideals taught in the Bhagavad Gita. So when you're students, when you study well, Lord Krishna will tell you, you should do your best to pass the examinations. You score the highest marks. Try to do very well in good examinations. You should be good students. That's what Lord Krishna would tell you. Now that is spirituality for students. I don't think any of your friends will find fault with that. Everyone will appreciate it. So very often, spirituality is sometimes interpreted as in a very narrow sense, as some kind of external religious practices. The religious practices do have a place in spirituality, but it's only one minor part of it. The most universal form of spirituality should be understood as doing one's own duty, performing one's own responsibilities. That's spirituality.
Swamiji, Sohamji has asked that what is difference in philosophy and science?
Philosophy and science, yeah. Science answers the questions how is the question that science is trying to answer. How the world is functioning, how the universe is functioning. So all the great scientists, whether Einstein or Newton or modern scientists, they have all tried to discover certain scientific laws and principles explaining how the world is functioning. And philosophy, especially Indian tradition philosophy, answers the question, why, in the broad sense. So in Indian tradition, philosophy is interpreted as a quest for truth. That is the interpretation of philosophy in Indian tradition, a quest for truth. Whether in Buddhism or even Jainism or different schools of Hinduism, it's a quest for truth, questions of existence, the ultimate meaning of life, the ultimate principles that guide or should guide our life. These are the questions which are discussed in philosophy. In science, we are mostly focusing on how the world that we see in front of us, that we experience in front of us, how this world is functioning, how it came into existence, what are the laws and principles by which they function. That's what science is trying to explain. Scientific laws can change from time to time. It's called paradigm shift. A set of scientific laws may have relevance for a short period, and again that relevance can decrease and new set of scientific laws come into existence. The older discoveries are not relegated to be untrue, but they are modified. But some of the fundamental questions and answers in philosophy remain unchanged for thousands of years. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Swamiji, for replying to all the queries.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm happy to meet all of you.
I hope many of us got enlightened today and the thirst of knowledge might got quenched to some extent. Now,
thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
It's time to welcome Mansi for a wonderful stuti.
ऐ मालिक तेरे बंदे हम, ऐसे हो हमारे करम, नेकी पर चले और बदी से टले, ताकि हंसते हुए निकले दम। ऐ मालिक तेरे बंदे हम, ये अंधेरा घना छा रहा, तेरा इंसान घबरा रहा, हो रहा बेखबर, कुछ ना आता नजर, सूखा सूरज छिपा जा रहा है, तेरी रोशनी में जो दम, तो अमावस को कर दे पूनम, नेकी पर चले और बदी से टले, ताकि हंसते हुए निकले दम। ए मालिक तेरे बंदे हम। बड़ा कमजोर है आदमी, अभी लाखों है इसमें कमी, पर तू जो खड़ा है दयालु बड़ा, तेरी कृपा से धरती थमी। दिया तूने हमें जग जन्म, तू ही झेलेगा हम सबके गम। नेकी पर चले और बदी से टले, ताकि हंसते हुए निकले दम। ए मालिक तेरे बंदे हम।
Before coming to the end of this session, I would like to call upon Aditi ji to propose a vote of thanks.
Thank you, Kashish. For vote of thanks, I would like to begin with an expression of gratitude for the chief guest of today's session, Swami Tattwamayananda ji, for enlightening us with his wise and noble words. Thanks is due to our principal, Dr. Rama ma'am, and our convener, Dr. Parul Pant ma'am, who since the very inception of Advait have been a guiding light for all of us. We are grateful to all the eminent professors and attendees from college, and our organizers and volunteers who have been who put in a great deal of effort in order to make this event successful. I am also grateful to all to the members of Gandharva Mandal, Subhash ji, Umakant ji, and Mansi ji, for their mesmerizing performances, and Mansi ji and Kashish ji, who conducted the whole session in an excellent manner. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aditi ji. Now we have reached the last stage of today's session. We would end this session with Kalyan Mantra. So now I would like to call Umakant ji for Kalyan Mantra.
सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः सर्वे सन्तु निरामया सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु मा कश्चित् दुःखभाग् भवेत् ॐ शान्तिः शान्तिः शान्तिः।
I thank everyone for coming. You all can leave now.